So I think the biggest part of the shift is food sources, and then maybe secondly is just bucks figuring out like who's the boss, who's the dominant buck. Some bucks are getting pushed off to different areas, but like our buck Goliath there, he's the biggest buck in that area, and I don't know if you guys know, but he moves 7 miles from where he is in the summer to where he is in the fall.
Lights.
Camera.
Follow the trail.
Ready to shoot.
If you know where a deer's bedding and you know where he's eating, that deer should be dead.
Camera.
If you're passive on a deer, what you're doing is you're teaching them.
I've got 30 bucks in the Michigan record book. Everyone but one has had at least one previous wound on his body. Some had as many as 4.
Trail Cam Radio from the guys at Exodus.
All right, we are live with Steve Sherk. We just left the Wild the Heart guy's house and drove about an hour here. And thanks for inviting us into your deer camp.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
So I'm looking around here, and I can tell there's a rich history of this being your guys' deer camp. There's a lot of deer, a lot of sheds.
Yep.
For anyone who doesn't know you, who are you? What do you do for a living? And I guess maybe touch on kind of the rich history.
Sure. Well, I am Steve Sherk, owner of Sherk Guide Service, and I've been guiding whitetails for about 6 years now. It's just a side business, though. I have a landscaping business. That's what is kind of like my main job. But then this camp here is where we lodge most of our clients, but it's really just a family tradition for like 30-some years. We got a bunch of great family members and friends that come here, and tons of great memories in this room. So,
absolutely, we're driving through here, and I was saying how beautiful the country is, and these guys are. But anyways,
I've heard both before. I know what you guys are saying.
There's just so much timber and ground and opportunity per se. I understand that maybe the class of deer isn't what everyone's looking for,
Sure.
But there's a ton of room to wander per se.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I mean, if you're the kind of guy that likes a real adventure and likes to cover ground and see a lot of new area, get away. I mean, to us, this is like the most perfect place, but you gotta be like it's gotta be for you though. Every guy at this camp, we don't have anybody really complaining. We get a few clients that come in every year, just a few that it was kind of a little bit of like, wow, this is some big woods, or wasn't expecting this, but for the most part, just the beauty of it, just that's so overwhelming that the challenge of hiking the mountains and the ruggedness, it kind of doesn't seem to bother you as much if you really take in the full beauty of what's here.
Yeah, it's the big woods, hill country. It's definitely a different experience if you're used to, if you're coming off ag ground or the Midwest. Yep. Where people are used to, farm ground, swamps, marsh, whatever.
Yep.
It can be a little bit challenging.
No, it's definitely challenging, but I like the challenge. Like, I'm not saying it's not difficult to hunt deer in farm country or other areas, but I think the eastern big woods may be the ultimate challenge. I hope that doesn't upset anyone, but I'm going to go where the ultimate challenge is. And I've actually never hunted anywhere but here, and being an outfitter, I get guys that have asked me, hey, we'll trade hunts with you. You come hunt with us, and then we'll hunt with you. And I don't want to hunt anywhere. And I'm not saying it's not fun everywhere else, but I'm just so passionate about this kind of hunting that I don't want anything else. So.
That's pretty cool.
Yep,
that is very cool. So you're an outfitter guide. Are you guiding individuals on the National Forest, or do you guys have leases, or break that down? So
sure.
Coming from the Midwest, when you hear that, you're thinking, okay, they're paying for various leases. Break down kind of what a client would expect.
Sure. Yeah, actually, there's 0 leases. We're super, super blessed what we have here. Some national forest, a lot of land owned by timber companies, oil companies. There's a few big properties. People just own the land and let people hunt. There's very little private land, just little pieces here and there, but pretty much I'd say 80-90% of everywhere you look is just public land. And so it makes it perfect for what I do because I'm not paying the taxes. There's really not much overhead except just this camp here. So
That's very cool. I tell you what, I don't know how many 814 numbers I have in my phone, but it seems like, I don't know, the 814 area code seems like there's just a lot of people who are super passionate about deer hunting.
Yeah, I was going to say, those 814 guys are probably mainly all deer hunters. There's a lot of really passionate deer hunters here, that's for sure.
We had a question pop up. Actually, we did a whole podcast on this as far as the type of hunter that comes from like what we consider like a high pressure state like Michigan or Wisconsin, Pennsylvania.
Yep.
What's your take on people coming from those high pressure areas? Do you feel like the hunters that are getting it done, guys like yourself that are putting in the work, do you think that makes them better, or do you think that puts them at a disadvantage? Like, what's your view on that?
I think it depends on the mindset. Like, some guys hate pressure and they try to avoid pressure, but in some ways I think pressure can also be an advantage because find where the pressure is, and that's where the deer aren't going to be, so you've already eliminated an area. But yeah, I mean, I get guys that are like, well, I'm not coming there because it's not private land, you don't have your own leases. But in these big woods, I mean, you can get away from the pressure. So we're not talking half mile in and, you know, you've seen it all. You're talking miles back in. So like I said, pressure can be an advantage if you have the right mindset, because all it does is, hey, I know all the guys are mainly in this area. I'll go over here, over there, and, you know, that's where the deer are going to be.
Do you find, I hunt a lot of public ground, and obviously we run a lot of cameras, so there's times we'll hang cameras like on access trails or trailheads, logging roads, you know, the easy areas that you would predict people to use. What's the cutoff point, you think, as far as like how far someone's going to go into the woods or access a piece of timber? Like an average guy,
Sure.
Is it like a quarter mile, half mile? Like what are you saying
You're
there?
probably about that. I mean, the average guy.
Right.
I mean, it also depends on, is there a big hill? Or a lot of guys don't want to go in if it's downhill, because if they do get something, it's all uphill drag. So, but for the most part, yeah, most guys don't go way back.
I never understood that, because my grandfather, you know, we hunt some property in West Virginia, and he does some stuff out west, and that's something that I always catch him saying, like, oh, you don't want to go in here and shoot anything because you're gonna have to like, isn't that the goal?
Right.
Like, the goal is to get something killed. Like, worry about the drag later.
Yeah, not bragging even for myself, or like even the guys that come to this camp, not so much my clients, but what I've been brought into, like, nobody complains about the drag. Like,
right?
If you shoot a nice buck, like the 110 point I got on the wall up there, I was like 2 miles back in, and I shot it right before dark. And fortunately, although it really honestly didn't matter, but my dad and a bunch of guys came and helped me out, but I didn't care if I didn't get back to camp till the next day. Like, that's just what's in our blood. Like, the drag means nothing. Maybe there's a little bit of a challenge aspect to it, like, hey, I brought that deer out 2 miles, but it's just we're just used to it, you know. Somebody that's been hunting little woodlots or, you know, farmland, real flat ground, and you can drive a four-wheeler or ATV. I mean, that guy, I feel bad for you if you come here. But for a client, it's different, because we'll drag it out for you. But the guy that comes here to do it himself and is not used to that experience, he may not come again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned crossing off areas to where, you know, there's high pressure, but how do you go about locating bucks every year? Or are you just, you know, growing up here and hunting this area forever, do you just kind of know some solid areas? But walk us through, how are you going about finding bucks in these big woods areas?
Sure. Yeah, there's a good amount of it. It's just those areas that produce every year. But I've learned, like, that they have tendencies. Number one is all your daytime activity, for the most part, is at the higher elevations. That's near where they're bedding. Then, like, if I'm finding new areas, I'm trying to find cover and feed in the higher elevations. And if you can combine all those things together, usually you're going to get good results. And then even like postseason scouting, if I'm looking for new areas, if maybe the feed wasn't there, but if I see the cover, and you could kind of tell, though, that the deer had fed in there over the fall or the winter, and the sign is there, then I go in there the next year, and most of the time they're still there.
So a lot of aerial scouting
Yep.
to where you're looking for those things.
Yep,
And
a
then,
lot. Yeah, a lot of Google Maps, Onyx, that kind of stuff. But there's certain kind of covers that you have to go in and just check for yourself, and they just don't show up on the satellites. Like if it's under the forest canopy, like if you got big, like oak trees with some brush underneath them, that's not showing up on the satellite. So I'm not talking against the Google Earth and all that stuff, but you really don't know for sure until you get out there and lace up the boots and look for yourself. So I probably walk at least 5 miles a day, and that's probably a minimum. There's a lot of days close to 10 miles.
Yeah.
So I'm always certainly blessed with the time and the position just to be able to do the scouting. I think you guys can see it's like, how does he post pictures every day? Well, because I'm fortunate to be able to have time to get out there.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I'm sure you're sacrificing, at the other end too, working for yourself,
Oh,
with the
yeah.
landscaping company after hours.
Yep.
I mean, it's 10:30 or 10 o'clock, and you're recording a podcast with us, so there's a lot of,
Yep.
everyone sees people spending time in the woods like yourself, and they get the assumption like, oh, this guy has a mate, he gets to spend every day in the woods. It's like, no, you're still getting everything else done. You're just doing it faster
Yep.
or harder than anyone else,
or
bef-
after
exactly.
the weekend or Sunday
Yep.
or something.
Exactly.
Yep, exactly. You hit the nail on the head.
Yep.
Absolutely. So, how do you go about using trail cameras while scouting in the big woods? I know, obviously, it's a whole different ballgame out here than what most people probably think when they think deer hunting. This is big terrain out here. So,
Sure.
how do you go about using trail cameras? Where are you placing them? What are your expectations? Following your Instagram, you guys are on some good deer.
Oh, yeah, no.
You're getting pictures of big deer right now.
Certainly. No, and this year seems to be one of our best years. Places where you're allowed the summertime, running mineral sites. And then, honestly, just this time of year, mock scrapes is probably the best way to get a good picture. I'm not saying you'll get the most pictures, but as far as getting good pictures, you want to be able to get the deer to stop and maybe pose, give you different angles. So this time of year, just mock scrapes. But kind of just what I touched on before, like you're not going to get good pictures if you had 100 cameras and you just randomly spread them out in all kinds of places in these big woods. You might get lucky here and there, but you're not going to find any consistency. The key is knowing what these deer do around here and then, going after them just by, past experiences and, the knowledge that you get every day. Every day you're out there, you're learning something new. So
With your, I guess, trail camera tactics and strategies, this time of year, everyone talks about a shift.
Mm-hmm.
From summer range, fall range, based on food or cover, habitat needs, whatnot.
Yep.
Everybody kind of has a different take on that.
Sure.
What do you see, from your trail camera data? Are these bucks shifting their home ranges?
Yeah, I think a lot of them are, but I think everyone says the shift is because the bucks know hunting season's coming, and I totally I don't believe in that at all. I think when a buck sheds his velvet, his body's going through a lot of different things, a lot of different changes, and one of the biggest things going on is I think there's a diet change, his body's starting to seek different nutrients. Like right now, I think they're getting into where they're looking for maybe like browse that might have more protein, or they're finding where the acorns are, and they're not moving much in the day because I think they're preserving calories and doing most of their feeding when it's cool at night. I don't think they hardly leave those bedding areas all day, and they lay there, but then they eat a ton at night and just to bulk up because, even though they might not have a calendar at home or a clock, they know in a few weeks what's yet to come, the rut, and Mother Nature's telling them, prepare your body for what's to come. So I think the biggest part of the shift is food sources, and then maybe secondly is just bucks figuring out like who's the boss, who's the dominant buck. Some bucks are getting pushed off to different areas, but like our buck Goliath there, he's the biggest buck in that area, and I don't know if you guys know, but he moves 7 miles from where he is in the summer to where he is in the fall. So
That's
him right above you guys. Those are his sheds mounted up there. So if you,
Wow.
yep. So you guys finally get to see him. So obviously he's the biggest buck in his area, and there's nobody telling him, or there's no buck pushing him out that I can think of. So he must know, 7 miles away, there's just better habitat for that time of year.
Right. That's something that we see. I mean, we run a lot of cameras, and on public that we hunt, we see that habitual or annual pattern kind of take place. I assume like you're seeing the same thing both with your cameras and like with your in-season scouting or past history with these certain deer.
Yeah, there's some deer that just seem impossible to figure out. You get them in the summer and you can scout them all you want. They don't ever show up again. Then some deer, you get them on camera summer, you look for them, you don't find them, and then in the rut, there they are back in that same area. I think one of the biggest things right now is, like I said before, they're in a bedding area, but they're close to feed, so they're not covering a lot of ground. So if your camera's not in that tiny little spot, like I had a area today that I had, like 10 cameras in and looking for one particular buck, and he was only on one camera. And they're all these 10 cameras are probably in like 5 acres.
Yeah.
So, but I know I'm right close to his bed, and he's coming into a young clear cut feeding, and he just goes right back to his bed.
In situations like that, I feel very strongly that a lot of guys get too dependent on their cameras, and maybe they don't have 10 cameras on 5 acres, and maybe they have one, so they're not getting photos of that deer, and they're like, oh, deer's gone.
Yeah, or what they do is they start looking too hard again. I'm going to move all my cameras, and I'm going to scout here and there, and all you're doing is pushing the buck around even more. I mean, you kind of have to have like a good sense, when bucks aren't showing up, are they here or are they not? And that's like a really hard thing to figure out. But I think if you've hunted an area long enough, and maybe if you're lucky, hunted a certain deer for a few years, you might then know, okay, he's done this to me before, and he's probably still there.
That's something I want to touch on a little bit. It's something that I've done and found extremely difficult, and that's kind of singling out a specific deer in big woods and trying to hunt one deer on how many hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of acres.
Yep.
What's your thought process on that, and where do you draw the line?
Well, I can't honestly say that I've ever picked out a certain deer honestly and killed them. I think it's possible, but I think you're really up for a huge challenge. I mean, I think some of my best results have probably just been I knew there were 4 or 5 of them in one general area, and one of them happened to come by. But, I mean, I think the most important thing, if you know some spots where that certain buck is bedding, I think that's the most important strategy, of getting on them and killing them, because feed can change at any time, but the bedding doesn't usually change a lot. So if you can get close to those bedding areas, not push the limits, I guess, that's probably the only way you can really target a specific buck around here, because in the rut, I mean, he's going to do whatever he wants then, and there might not even be any pattern or tendencies. I mean, I've seen him in the rut once again, 6-7 miles, there he is. So I think, like I said, you gotta know where he's bedding and find that not too close but not too far, spot, be in the right spot to target a certain buck.
So it sounds like a lot of your scouting and I guess trail camera strategy, boots on the ground scouting, is related to cover, which is obviously related to bedding or security cover and bedding.
Yep, my first thing I'm looking for usually is get higher elevations. Mm-hmm. I mean, they'll go low, but almost always at night. And then there's some. I think they hardly ever leave the tops of the mountains. They just that's their advantage. There's better wind up there, and I've always believed that a buck stays up high because when he gets pushed, he can get away from predators faster because he's got that downhill momentum. But yeah, so I'm, like I said, higher elevations, then cover, then feed. But if you can combine all those things in an area close together and the sign is there, then you've got a really good spot.
Makes sense.
Yep.
So I did some digging prior to this, and I wanted to bring up a scenario or something that you discussed earlier was that you were hunting a hot spot funneled during the rut that had 14 different bucks on cameras in a week period.
Yep.
Several visiting the scrape every day.
Yep.
At least 6 of them were between 130 and 150.
Yeah, the big 8-point, not to interrupt you, but the heavy 8-point there, that's the one I shot from that spot. Got the curved brows. So that's just so you know, that's the story that you're bringing up.
So I guess tell us more about that, or maybe break down the hunt of that specific deer. How did you find that spot, and how did you hunt it?
Sure.
And then we'll see what questions arise.
Sure. Well, I was scouting an area, and I didn't even see this on the maps, but there's this big, huge clear cut, and it was on a steep hill. And then about 50 yards on the edge of the clear cut is a cliff. So, and I found it in the summertime, actually. There was no, I didn't see any tracks or anything like that, but I saw these huge old buck rubs. And there was a deer trail in the middle of where the cliff was and this nasty clear cut was. And there was 3 huge rubs in a line going right through there. And I thought, that's just be like a heck of a rut spot. And I put the camera in there in late August. Never even had a buck on it. And then it was middle October. I just happened to check it, and I had made a mock scrape there in August. And, I had a broken licking branch, and a buck, finally found it. And there was just a few bucks working it mid-October. So I still wasn't quite sure about the spot because it was a new one. And then it was probably around the 26th or 27th October, I go back, and all those big rubs, what they would call signpost rubs, they're all hit. And then there was a big scrape line going through there. And I checked the camera, and it was the best camera pull I've ever had in my life. And I was just it was somebody just happened to put this card in there just to fool me. It's so unreal. And then I hunted that stand that night. And I didn't see any big bucks that night. I saw a couple small bucks and some doe. But then the next morning, I saw a ton of bucks, a couple doe, and then I hit a giant, probably a 150 or 160, never found it. And then the next day, hunted the stand again, and that's when I shot that big 8-point. So that spot was just found by more boots on the ground scouting, but it was just one of them rut funnels that you dream about. But it's funny, since then, it's been good, but it's never been as good since then. I don't really know why. I mean, there's always some bucks coming through there, but I must have just hit it at the right time.
You think it's just the maturity of the natural browse and the regen from that clear cut? And
I think in the rut, though, if this clear cut's so nasty that the bucks don't want to go through it because they want to get from point A to point B the easiest way and spend the less energy. So I just think it was just one of them perfect funnels that anything that was coming through that area, had really wanted to come right where I was set up.
Do you remember the dates and when that scrape really started to heat up?
It was October 22nd. And I hunted there, I think I started hunting it around the 28th. But then that spot died off. I kept the camera up even after I shot that buck, and that spot died off somewhere in the first week of November. But I think what it was is there were some really big bucks in that area, and they were cruising, searching for does, and there just weren't any does in heat that early. But then once does started coming into heat, that funnel didn't mean as much because the bucks were already, finding does in other places. So, but yeah, I would just dream to be back in that stand again for what I saw those days. That's for sure.
I assume that's a place you always have a camera for. Probably you'll have a camera there forever.
Camera's
for the
there
rest of
right
your life.
now. Yep. No matter. I don't care if I go a couple years without getting a buck picture there. There's going to be a camera there. So it's that good of a spot.
So discussing kind of how things change. Do you ever see? Are you seeing particular bucks showing up in the same areas on cameras? We ask this question almost to everybody. Are you seeing annual rut data on your trail cameras, or not so much?
You mean annual rut at a certain time every year? Or?
Yeah, a certain time, or even certain bucks on a particular scrape or on a particular camera year after year.
I've heard a lot about guys saying they'll get pictures of a certain buck in a certain area certain times a year. I don't think I've seen that, but I do. As far as if you're going to talk maybe when the rut might begin, I find it seems to me like the same pattern every year. The only thing I notice differently is weather conditions kind of have control of how heavy the rut is. I mean, if it's real warm, you're going to get a little bit lighter of a rut, maybe a little bit more night activity. But, I mean, you get a nice 30, 40-degree day temp couple weeks in the rut. I mean, you're going to be probably experiencing the rut of the decade if you can get something like that. So
that makes a lot of sense. That lines up with, a lot of the so-called gurus or whoever that we're talking to. I know Jeff Sturgis is a weather nut and talks about different weather strategies, and everyone talks about the rut, and it happens the same time. Like it happens the same time every year.
Exactly.
It's just whether or not you're seeing the chasing or whatever that you associate with the word rut. And a lot of it is to do with, I agree with you, a lot of it's the weather.
Yeah, I've said it before, too. Everybody wants to go in November. Like, everyone's booking their hunts in November, and that's great. I mean, it's the rut, the breeding, the chasing, all that, but I like it right before that time when there's hardly any does in heat, and those bucks are just, they're on their feet looking for those first estrus does. And, I mean, I just think that 5, 6, 7 days before Halloween gets so overlooked, and that's my favorite week to be in the woods. I've shot most of my bucks then. I've seen some of the nicest bucks then, because the most mature buck in every area is probably going to get the first mature doe or the first estrus doe that goes in heat. So by early November, a lot of those bucks aren't being seen because they're just stuck right on a doe.
What's your take on the tail end? Like when you get to, I don't want to say, I guess, post-rut, like that third week, the week of Thanksgiving. Like, I know it's probably a little bit different because you guys that's rifle season probably.
I think
for you
we're
guys,
a little
right?
different here, but I think one of the really good rut times here also is maybe like the early teens of November. I think most of the breeding, most of the lockdown phase is probably like November 1st and November 10th. But then all of a sudden those bucks, because they'll kind of disappear. When they're on does, you don't usually get them on camera because they're just following her around. They're avoiding the scrapes, or, they're kind of just doing whatever she wants. But they start showing back up a lot, like November 10th to maybe like 17th. And that's another really great time to be in the woods once again, because I think, a lot of the breeding has been done, and then they're just dying to find that one last doe.
Are you monitoring that activity a little bit, like with trail cameras on scrapes, as far as like when those scrapes are drying up? Now hey, bucks are probably locked down with those. Is that something you?
Yep. I mean, I'll notice that it's almost like a pattern. Like I'll see some really good scrape activity like mid-October, but it's all mainly at night. But then you get towards maybe after October 20th to Halloween, it just seems like that's the best time to be on the scrapes, and you're getting a lot of daylight pictures. But then early November, it gets really scattered. I mean, you'll find it. You can still find a buck hitting a scrape in November at that time, definitely. But the best, highest concentration of that activity is, the later part of October. And then, but like we said before, I do start to see a lot of bucks back on scrapes like November 10th to, maybe almost November 20th. Then it really seems to drop off after that. So
I couldn't agree more. That's
And I'm sure a lot of guys you interview, if a guy's really putting a lot of time in the woods, you're probably hearing a lot of the same things, but it can probably be a little bit different from state to state, I bet.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone has their, the same general concept with most guys that understand what's going on. The answers are kind of similar, but everyone has their own take and twists and, their own input on it, I guess. But Jake's like the scrape master in our group. Like
exactly what you said is I could pull up my hard drive right now and show you the exact same pictures of them drying up, and then a mega giant coming in hitting at the 10th or 11th, and then getting them seeking for a couple of days after that, disappears, gone, or you get shot. But anyways, I'm a big fan of that same time of October. Obviously, we get a ton of pictures sent in from customers and from partners. In that 25th, 26th, there's always a ton of giant deer that are sent in that are working to scrape in daylight. And I see that as well. Maybe they're not giants, but they're mature bucks for the area. So I definitely agree with what you're saying. So that, last 10 days of October, let's say, just for conversation's sake, how are you going about hunting those last 10 days of October if that's your favorite time of year?
Sure. Well, especially guiding wise, I mean, every stand we got, then we probably got a camera on a scrape. So we're probably checking those cameras like every 3 days, and then as soon as we find one of them hot scrapes at that time, I mean, you're on it. You're going to hunt it 2-3 days in a row because, I mean, obviously you may not get a big buck on it every day, but most of the time a certain buck is at least within 5 days or probably less is going to be hitting that scrape again. So once you find the scrape, I mean, you got to put your time in on it.
Do you relate those hot scrapes to bedding, whether that's doe bedding or buck bedding? Is that what you're looking for rather than just a random scrape like in a bottom somewhere?
I think there's a couple different types of those scrapes. Like I think there's some that a buck will get out of his bed and maybe right on the edge of where some other bucks are kind of cruising by his bed, you'll have a scrape there if it's kind of like a good travel route, and that could be a great scrape to hunt. But then like if you get closer to doe bedding or doe feeding, there's usually a big scrape there too in those travel routes. And I mean that probably for the rut, I mean that's got to be the ultimate scrape to hunt because you're probably getting way more than 1 or 2 good bucks in that spot.
I'm drawing a blank right now.
I'll bring something up too
please
that
do.
I hear a lot of guys talking about, and you hear a lot of people say, don't hunt scrapes because there's all this research. They're mainly used at night, but I've noticed, especially in this kind of country that we hunt, because we're not hunting the farmland. Like I'll see guys post these pictures, and all these scrapes are getting hit at night, but it's right on the edge of a food plot. And I think if I was, in my opinion, I think a lot of that research is probably based on those kind of scrapes because you get back in these woods here, way back in near these bedding areas, there's a lot of scrapes that you hardly get a night picture on. Mm-hmm. And I mean, so do I think that bucks just naturally say, well, I'm not hitting that scrape because, I hit scrapes only at night? I think that's completely false information. I think it's all about where the scrape's located.
Mm-hmm.
I think they love to hit scrapes, and if you're near that safe area, near bedding where they want to be in the daytime, I would hunt over that scrape over anywhere.
I actually agree with you 100% on that.
Yep.
A lot of the annual data or rut activity that we see on camera is related to cover in proximity to that scrape.
Yep.
Almost
exactly.
always. Now, are there scrapes in like some of the benches and terrain feature saddles or whatever, or even on the edge of a clear cut on a food source or oaks, oak flat or whatever?
Yep.
We still see that activity, but the daylight activity is much heavier on those areas where the scrapes are near some type of cover.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, I would never believe if anyone says that scrapes aren't great areas to hunt because they're mainly visited at night. It all depends on where the scrape is. So scrapes are one of my favorite ways of hunting big bucks.
Here's a question while we're on the scrape topic, which we've brought this up in the past. Do you feel like a mature buck will scent check a scrape before he actually goes and hits it, or do you think once they've already hit that licking branch and pawed, peed on the ground or whatever, they're just going to that scrape automatically?
I think it depends on what his mood and what's on his mind. Like I've seen bucks. I've been in my stand, fortunate to see where he comes in and just kind of looks at the scrape and he'll put his nose up, and then go by it. And I think what that is he must only be interested to see if any other deer hit that scrape or if a doe in heat has maybe been there. But when he wants to go through the area and say, hey guys, just so you know, I've been here, that's when he's definitely going to go right to the scrape, hit the licking branch, rip it up, urinate in it. So I think it just depends on, what he wants to do at that time. But certainly they do both. They do check scrapes without even, going right up to them and working them. I've seen that happen.
Interesting. We've noticed, I guess, a similar situation, like stand location set up over top of a scrape. You see a buck come in and skirt the scrape, whether he's skirting it because you're there and he knows you're there, or he's just simply circling downwind. But then taking that a step further, again, with having so many cameras kind of at disposal, putting a camera downwind, on a leeward side if it's on a bench or on a actually ridge top, and see those bucks use thermals in the evening time and scent check. It's kind of
it's amazing.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, and like I said, and maybe some of the time I've seen this happen. Maybe they did get a whiff of my own scent too, and that's why. But for sure, I know for a fact that their noses. That's one thing I don't think deer biologists have done enough research on, from what I can see, is I don't think we have any idea how good a deer's nose is. I really don't. I think he can be 30, 40 yards from that scrape and already know if it's been hit or not, if the wind's right in that. So I definitely, like I said, they definitely check them without even going to them. Especially during the rut, if he's just really cruising, looking for a hot doe, I think that's what happens a lot when we're not getting those pictures on our scrapes. Is those stands may still be good to hunt because those bucks might be coming through, but they're just more interested in just cruising, covering ground, and they're just passing out of range of the cameras.
Right. Yeah. Agreed.
That's a good point. How many cameras are you running in total? I assume.
Yeah, we're running probably at this right today. I'm going to say probably close to 70. Last year it was around 70 some. I'd like to run more, but
that's a lot. That's a lot of cameras.
Yeah.
It's a lot of cameras for.
And especially in this kind of area when you might have cameras way back in, and you might have 2-3 hours into checking one camera. And I'm getting out of that more because I want to be able to run a lot of cameras, because the more cameras you have, the more intel. I don't see why that doesn't benefit you. But we're trying to find areas too where maybe they're a little bit overlooked, and we don't have to go as far, but still be able to run a lot of cameras. Because if I could run 200, I would run 200. I don't care.
I love it.
Yep.
Well, even when you're not getting even those overlooked spots, even when you're not getting photos, it's still telling you something as long as you decipher the information correctly. Like we talked a little bit earlier about guys not getting pictures of a certain deer and then thinking that deer is not there, but maybe he is. He's just skirting a camera. I think it takes a special person and someone that's really in tune with the woods to realize the situation and know whether or not that deer's there, or if he's
and think about it this way: if you had 20 cameras out and you're only getting a buck on one camera, that's actually a good thing, because you've just possibly eliminated 19 other spots.
Yep.
So, I like that. If I run a ton of cameras and a small percentage of them is only getting pictures, but they're somewhat consistent, I'll take that over a buck showing up on every camera, because then you don't know how to hunt them.
Right. Right.
That's an interesting perspective.
Yep.
I don't know. It's about 11 o'clock.
Yep. No,
I know I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I think I found my scrape, fellow scrape person, because I love scrapes too. I love that time of year, and I think.
Yep, me too.
I got some more stuff to talk on.
Sure.
One of the things that I notice with what you're doing, like in this area of the country regions, part of the state, Pennsylvania is not considered a big buck state.
Yep.
Everyone says, oh, it's a typical Pennsylvania 8-pointer, like 16-inch spread, like 100-inch deer, right?
You're not telling me anything I'd never heard or known.
But I'm sure a lot of people that are listening to this podcast probably follow you on social. If they don't, they probably should, because you're getting pictures and putting people on really big deer.
Sure.
Not just big deer for Pennsylvania, but big deer
in general.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yep, wherever you're at.
So, I don't want you to give any of your secret sauce away, but you obviously are thinking about this game differently than the majority of people in this area.
And I think you hit the nail on the head that you have to be different in this area, because obviously it's public land and you're competing with other people. So the deer are going to pick up on people's tendencies, and a lot of people hunt the same way and do the same things. So if I wasn't different, I'd probably have the same results as them. And honestly, though, a lot of the key of it is just the time and the effort, and going out there and learning as much as you can. And it's not just one or two things that I do that are working for me. It's 100 little things that are making the difference. But it's the time, it's the effort, and just I think a lot of people just they don't believe what's here. And if it weren't for trail cameras, I wouldn't believe what was here either. Because a lot of these bucks I've never even seen with my own eyes. They're so smart and so witty that they're only showing up on the cameras. But I think the biggest reason why, because Pennsylvania didn't always have bucks like this. I mean, this has only been going on for 15, 20 years. But when Pennsylvania went to an antler restriction, I think that helped. And then they did increase deer antlerless tags, and that did lower the deer numbers. What really, in some ways, it might have backfired because they lost a lot of hunters. People wanted to go out there and see 30, 40, 50 deer a day and maybe one little spike, and they'd shoot it, and they were thrilled. Now, I mean, if a guy doesn't put his time in these woods, you can go the whole season and not even see a deer. Seriously, I mean, I'm not saying that we don't have deer, but the numbers are down to where you got to know what you're looking for. You got to put your time in. But if you do all those things, to me, if you would be happy to kill and hunt big bucks, I would take this over any of the old days that we used to have. So, yeah, like I said, I just think that, the time that I have out there, learning areas, really getting to know areas that I'm hunting, where the bedding is, where the feed is, finding any patterns in those areas. I think that's related to the success that you see as far as me finding some of these deer. And it's a year-round thing. I think a lot of guys are going out right now. There's guys going out there right now and putting up their stands and just putting out cameras. But if you don't have a year-round approach scouting and hunting these woods, you're not going to have major numbers of big bucks, located before the season.
Mm-hmm.
So.
What's your take on, the big woods type deer, public ground? Obviously, they see some pressure and they relate their daily life to that. But as far as being less intrusive, is that like putting up a less tolerant to human intrusion, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. Do you see the big woods type deer here being less tolerant to intrusion, or do you think, depending on where they live, they just get used to whatever?
I also think it's based on time of the year. Like this time of the year, the intrusion is really, really a big factor. Like I was telling my dad tonight, we went into an area last week, had a bunch of cameras out, and a lot of the cameras were getting pictures. And we threw this stand up in a big bulky ladder stand on one of this main routes that those bucks were using, getting a lot of pictures. And I just happened to go in there today. Maybe I pushed it a little bit, but I went in there and all of a sudden everything changed. There's not one buck on any of those cameras. But I did have a remote camera down below in a bedding area where we haven't been at all. And that was the only spot where I got pictures this past week. But what I think happened was them seeing that stand in there, I really think it bothered them. They're not stupid. They've seen humans in those stands before, so obviously that definitely altered their routes. But in the rut, you're getting bucks from miles and miles away. Obviously, we all know that they're a little more vulnerable to make a mistake then. I think you can get away with a lot more then. I've hunted stands 4 or 5 days in a row, even pee out of it, and you name it, and new bucks show up, come by. So I think a lot of it's based on time of the year, but right now especially, you really got to be careful with your intrusion in areas because the bucks are holding tight to those bedding areas, but they're near a food source, and they're not, he's not on this ridge here and then this ridge tomorrow. He's probably just right in this one general spot, and if you're putting too much time and scent in there, then he's going to go elsewhere.
Do you see any negative impacts from cameras? Obviously you're running 70-some cameras. That's quite a few. Have you ever seen like a specific deer look at a camera, get its picture taken, and then become so-called camera shy, I guess?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, we've even with your guys' cameras that basically don't flash or do anything, I've seen them look at them, run, and never get a picture of that buck again. And I don't believe some of those deer were just passing through. I totally believe that there's camera shy deer. There's some that seem to almost like the camera. I mean, I've had some come up and lick the camera, but then there's some of those deer that are maybe gifted with the more genetic intelligence that they don't put up with nothing. And I don't want to get to where I'm going to say cameras hurt you, because that percentage of bucks that are doing that that's a very small percentage. I would rather take the intel that cameras are giving me, but I do think there's some deer out there that are definitely camera shy, especially obviously the mature deer that have been around and know they can't afford to make mistakes.
So if you're like, let's just play the scenario out. That specific deer that's camera shy, let's say he's a giant and you really want to go after him. Like, what is your tactic in trying to address that situation with that deer being camera shy? Are you putting those cameras up in the air? What's your take?
No, see, I think, well, I can't say I've putting the camera up in the air could be an excellent idea. Maybe they probably don't notice that. But I think as long as I get one picture of that deer, I know he's around somewhere, and I'd probably at least hunt that area. And I think by his body language in that picture, I would probably realize, okay, this deer's camera shy. I probably got to hunt him a little differently, but I'd probably just go like I normally do and try to find the right bedding habitat in that area, find the food source, and then go accordingly, put some time in that area, and then see. But I also agree with you. I do think, maybe running some cameras literally 10, 15 feet up in the tree, especially yours that aren't doing anything, no flash or anything. I think that's probably your best way to approach a deer like that.
Are you running video on any of those cameras or pictures solely?
Yep, just pictures solely. I mean, the videos are nice because obviously it's like watching TV, I guess, but I mean, I'm not into like getting the greatest picture where I'm going to put it up on my wall. I just want cameras for intel. I want to know when are the deer coming in this area, if, when, how, and as long as I can tell what that specific deer is, that's all that matters to me. And I like the picture part, because you guys would know better than me, but I think the video is going to use more battery. Is that correct? So, yeah, if I don't have to go out there and change batteries often and stay out of the area a little less, then that suits me better.
Yep, it's going to use more battery. Power consumption is going to be higher than also the storage space on your cards.
Sure.
Obviously is more.
Yeah, especially in the summertime. I mean, I'll have cards where 3,000-4,000 pictures on them. So if I was running those in video mode, I mean, I'd probably be driving myself crazy.
A lot of watch time.
I had another question and I just lost it.
Are you running lithium batteries during the winter, or using alkaline or some on lithium?
I've mainly just run alkaline, and I mean, even with your guys' cameras, in the summertime, when I'm getting thousands and thousands of pictures, I mean, I'll probably change the camera like twice in the summer, the batteries, just to high quality alkaline. But then once hunting season comes, I mean, because I'm getting less pictures because most of mine are just on trails and scrapes, and I may be getting as many deer on camera, but they're not there for an hour or whatever. So, I don't really, I don't even see a need that I have to run the lithium. I mean, maybe you get more bang for your money out of the lithium, but I've just ran alkaline for years, and I've been happy with that.
What are you doing? Obviously, with 70 cameras, thousands of pictures over the summer, there's a lot of data coming in. What are you doing as far as like storing and managing your photos? And then are you also looking at like weather related to those photos?
Sure. I don't really, in the summertime, I really don't care, because summer is a completely different season, and I think the deer, what they do in the summer might not be related to what they're doing in the fall. But in the fall, I have been like, I'll have weeks where I'm noticing, holy cow, I got a lot of pictures, and then I have gone back and tried to figure out, was it the moon, or was it the cold front, or after a rain? And I have noticed that if you pay attention to that stuff, you'll find a lot of consistent information on how weather and different things like that can make a difference in deer movement. Definitely. So that just goes to show another reason why I think trail cameras, other than a gun and a bow, a trail camera to me is one of the greatest tools you can have in your arsenal.
I agreed. 100%.
Especially an Exodus camera. I'm not just
Give us a
saying
plug.
that. I'm just saying that.
No, we appreciate that. Well, I mean, I get running 70 cameras. I mean, you have to have a whole sample size or sample platter of trail cameras. But,
well, I'll tell you guys another thing. Obviously, Goliath is my favorite deer.
So that's the sheds from that deer.
Yep,
and
right
you have
up there.
pictures of them this year on that.
Yep.
One. Okay.
But if you saw this year, I put an Exodus in there because last year I did just put a cheap Tasco in that spot, and I wasn't real happy. So I said this year I'm putting an Exodus on
a good
him,
one in there.
and I got the pictures I wanted.
Yeah, that's a big deer.
Yes, he is. We could be here another 2 hours if we were talking about Goliath, but all I can say is he's got me hooked on him. That's for sure.
I see the twinkle in the eye. I think that's the deer you're after.
That's a special deer, definitely.
So how many years of history? Is there 2 years there?
2016 was the first time I ever saw him, and I lost him completely in 2017 because I didn't realize how far his summer to fall range was. And I mean, I'll be honest with you, I don't know him as good as I should. I know where he is in the summer. I know where he goes probably late fall, early winter. But in hunting season, I went through hundreds of photos like about 3 or 4 months ago, trying to just see if maybe I had some pictures of him and I didn't realize it was him. And I did find one that I know was him, probably about a mile from where I found his sheds, which is a mile closer from his winter range to his summer range. So that's kind of what I'm going to base on this year, is where I had that one picture kind of in between the summer and his fall range. But like I said, I can't say that I have him. I know right where he beds, where he feeds, but I'm going to do whatever I can to find those things. I can tell you that. So there's a lot of cameras out there that pretty much have his name on it this year.
So when you got his picture and he was 7 miles away, did it take a second to realize, like, oh crap, that's the same deer? Or did you have any inclination, or did it take you completely by surprise?
Well, the story was I think the day after Christmas, this past Christmas, I was scouting an area and kick out a huge buck, and I didn't know it was Goliath because it was so far from where he was in the summer. And so I go up and I kicked him out of this big bed. And I said, this looks like a great wintering spot. It was somewhat of a south slope. It's kind of thick in spots. And then there was a lot of hemlock in there. I said, I bet you this deer might just winter in here. So I never even went back in there all winter. I went in there first or second week of April, and I can see the impression of the bed like 30 yards away, and I look and I see tines sticking up in this bed, and I'm just like, holy cow, that deer literally dropped his antlers in that bed I kicked him out of in the winter. And I picked the antlers up, and it was probably like 30 seconds. I look and I'm like, holy cow, it's Goliath. Like, this spot here is 6 miles from where I had him last summer, but it's a mile from where I know where I had him previously before in like the early winter time. But see, I never knew Goliath. I thought there was 2 different deer. I never realized that Goliath is the same deer that's going 7 mile stretch. I thought it was one deer maybe over in this other half, and it wasn't until that day when I realized, holy cow, for these past few years, Goliath has only been one deer. Even though I had so many pictures of it, there were times I looked and I said, God, that looks like the same deer, but no, there's just no way. But when I got the sheds, I mean, because he has that little kicker type split G2, when it's 100% sure the same deer. So, and that makes sense on why, because the area where he lives in the summertime, he completely disappears. And I ran like 20 cameras in there last year. After August, there was no sighting of him. So that kind of was also a sign, like, yeah, he doesn't spend his time there, after the summer.
Well,
it's crazy that, when we think we have something pegged or figured out, it's like something like that happens. You're like, golly, I wasn't even close.
No, I might not even be close. Like I'm drawing a line, and I'm getting on like the satellite maps and trying to find all the covers in between where he's at in the summer, where he's at in the fall or the winter, trying to put a camera in every possible location. But I'm only going kind of in a straight line. He might be 3 miles to the east or west and then cut back over. So I think there's some deer you may want them so bad, but you also have to know when to probably give up on them too. So.
Well, it sounds like you're not going to give up. So.
No, maybe I shouldn't say give up, but if he's not showing up by late October and I still got a tag, he's probably going to start going a little bit lower on my list.
Fair enough.
Yeah, fair.
So.
Well, we hope you catch up with him because that's a heck of a deer.
even though if I get him this year, he's going to look like about the same exact mount that I already got up there because I mounted his sheds, but that'll be just fine, honestly, even if I have 2 identical mounts.
That's actually really funny.
Yeah, I thought about that. I thought, well, maybe that was a bad idea, but I don't know. I had to do that.
Are you going to have them semi-sneak right?
I think that's we'll have them side by side, one semi-sneak right, one
Evil
left.
twins. Well, shoot. Anything else you want to cover here?
Honestly, I just, I really appreciate you guys coming here, and I think you guys have seen it in my posts, and I'm not just saying it, but I'd recommend your product to anyone. It's my favorite camera to use, and I know only in the future that it's going to get better and better. So the Exodus it's never going to fail me, and I'm never going to fail it. So
well, we
thanks a lot for coming.
Appreciate the words. That's humbling.
We appreciate that. Where can people find you? I guess verbally plug your Instagram if you'd like, and we'll also have it in the description as well, or anything else where people can find you or contact you.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not a social media guy, Sherk'sGuideService.com, or just look up Sherk's Guide Service on Instagram or Facebook, and my phone number's on both of those things. So, whether through the website or social media, someone can get a hold of me, and we look forward to, even though we get a lot of the same clients every year, we love meeting new people. It's the first time I finally got to meet you guys, and it's been a pleasure. And that's pretty much the same it is with most deer hunters. So, but yeah, that's that.
Cool. Well, thank you for bringing us into your camp, and we look forward to following your season. I'm pretty excited to see how it unfolds.
Sounds good, guys. Thanks a lot.